Hi, and welcome back to Engage. I'm your host, Kelly Donlin Hoy, founder of KDH Consulting. And our audience today is in for a rare treat because I have not one, but two guests with me today. In just a moment, you'll meet Pat Schaeffer and Carol Vallone Mitchell. And believe me when I tell you, the brain trust between these two women is impressive. They are co-founders and owners of their consultancy, Talent Strategy Partners. Carol is a two-time author with titles including Breaking Through Bitch, How Women Can Shatter Stereotypes and Lead Fearlessly, which I've read, and How Men Can Lead Culture Change and Nurture Tomorrow's Leaders, which is due to arrive on my doorstep from Amazon today. In addition, these women have deep and wide expertise in a broad range of topics. Naturally, talent strategy development, organizational culture, collaborative leadership, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The list goes on. In fact, this could be a multiple podcast episode series, and we'll see where we get today. But these are also topics that every organization is grappling with so that they can survive and thrive. Now, before we get into those rich topics, let's welcome and say hello to our guests. I'll start with Pat Schaeffer. Pat, I'm happy to call you a friend for over 10 years, and you've been a colleague and a mentor to me in all things change and culture related. So let's start by having you tell us a little bit about your work and maybe a little bit about how you and Carol became business partners.
I'd be delighted. And thanks for having us, Kelly. And thanks for being a friend for so many years. It's been great fun. So let me start with a little bit of background. Both of us have been in both the corporate side and the consulting side in human resources for more years than we care to count.
We don't count on this show. It's okay.
Okay, good. and we actually met while we were in consulting and ended up in the same consulting firm, Mercer Human Resource Consulting. And after a few years there, we said, you know what? Wouldn't it be great if we just went out and did this on our own? Because we were really starting to get into the leadership development side of things, which was not a big area for Mercer. So we left there in 2001 and with the idea that we'd be a mini Mercer. You know, we'd have a broad range of services that we'd bring to clients. And over the years, we actually narrowed our focus and realized that our real passion was around leadership development. And so that's really where we've focused our efforts in the last few years. And then that narrowed even further into women's leadership development.
Beautiful, beautiful. Carol, care to add any more to that part of the story?
Yes, because when Pat and I founded Talent Strategy Partners in 2001, I was only a couple of years out of my PhD program, and my dissertation was looking at gender differences in leadership behavior. And from that, I created this women's leadership model and wanted to write a book, but kind of put it aside because Talent Strategy Partners had to get going. And also I didn't want to focus this in that direction. We wanted to be more inclusive, if you will, in what services we provided and how people would see us. So in any case, when I did write the book, it was with Pat's urging, and I actually went back and did some more research and developed the Women's Leadership Blueprint, which is what you read about in Breaking Through Bitch. So that really, that we were out of the closet then. We had real deep expertise in women's leadership development. So we moved more in that direction recently, you know, from the book. But quite honestly, all of that stuff from the very beginning, from 2001, we were always really mindful of what I had learned in studying gender issues in leadership. so that whenever we were creating competency models for clients, looking at leadership characteristics that they could develop, we really paid attention to what does success look like when you're a woman leading, and what does success look like when you're a man leading. So that definitely factored in.
Absolutely. And I smiled when you said at Pat's urging, because when Pat urges, people act. Truly.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you were focused on inclusion and diversity of leadership styles long before it was the it thing. So my perspective right now, my anecdotal feedback is that every single company that I work with, every client that I work with is focused on DE&I. And as an aside, it always was D&I in my mind. So maybe one of you can comment on when the E arrived. Maybe I just dropped the letter, but now I absolutely hear diversity, equity, and inclusion. And again, from the client base that we work with, I think there is a wide range of how they're focusing. So there are some companies that I might say are addressing it topically. They're talking about the importance of it, messaging about it, while they try to figure out how they're going to evolve their organization to really embrace it. Then there is the other end of the spectrum where people are full on systematically embedding diversity and inclusion in everything from hiring practices to day-to-day operations, and they're holding people accountable to it. So really full spectrum of getting behind this. And again, that's anecdotal. So if memory serves, the two of you recently went through some very heavy certification on DE&I. So Pat, why don't you share with us, what are the trends? Why is this so important to businesses to get their arms around DE&I?
Well, sure. Let me start with giving a plug for the course, the certification course that we took. It was through the University of South Florida, Muma School of Business. It was a 14-hour course over 7 weeks, 2 hours a week. And it was impressive, not just in the content, but in the diversity of the lecturers and the speakers that they brought to the panel discussions, to the lectures, and all of that. And we just learned an enormous amount. And that material is all out there. It was sponsored by the university, by a big company based in Tampa called J-Bill, and by the hockey team, the Tampa Bay Lightning. So it was free to everybody, and there were something like 135,000 participants.
Wow,
isn't that great?
Yeah, it was really a fabulous program. But you know, thinking about that really made me realize that because COVID has been such a huge challenge for leaders, that I thought to myself, well, you know, is this really setting back DE&I initiatives? And by the way, the equity piece had to come in there. If you don't have equity, if you don't have fairness, you don't have inclusion. Mm-hmm. And inclusion is really what it's all about. I mean, you can have diversity, you can recruit a lot of different kinds of people, but if they don't feel a part of the organization, they're not going to stay. So inclusion is absolutely critical. They got to have a voice in things. They got to be involved. They have to be engaged. And so you would think that perhaps this has all taken a back seat because of COVID, but in fact, it hasn't. McKinsey has been tracking thousands of companies across the globe since 2014. And what they found is kind of similar to what I call your anecdata, that
I love that.
I love that.
That's brilliant. Anecdata. Oh my gosh, that's my new favorite word. Well, I've got some anecdata to share with you here. Okay. It sounds so much more robust.
So their latest report is titled Diversity Wins. And what they found is that really the interest in diversity and inclusion, and I'm going to call it inclusion and diversity, because I think the inclusion is more important, has really not waned. But it's interesting that it's the companies who were invested in it before in 2014 are the ones who are still invested in it.
Okay.
And they've got really powerful statistics behind what that's done for those organizations. And I can get into that a little bit later, but
sure.
But just to say that diversity and inclusion and diversity is still a very, very hot topic. And some companies are doing a great job and others aren't.
Yes,
It
well,
really
my
takes...
data would,
yes, exactly.
would validate
yeah,
that.
exactly. And it's
So,
those organizations that, you know, they build it into the system. It's part of their strategic business goals. That's where it really takes life.
Okay, and I you know, thank you for the comment about COVID, because I do feel like for a year everyone was walking through Jello, right? There was like very slow movement, not full pause, but I imagine the pace might have slowed. But it's terrific to hear that people still are sort of putting their foot on the gas, maybe even because everyone was remote, and that inclusion equation, the bar just got a lot higher. And that's my experience. Like, and we do engagement. How do you engage when no one's anywhere together? You know, so
right. And people did worry about, you know, well, everybody's working remotely, they're not together, but yet it makes it all that much more important to be inclusive, because you have to build trust to help people get through this. And I think also your experience probably would bear this out as well. Because of COVID, we really got to see people's humanity, and there are people that were comfortable with that and people that weren't. An executive coach colleague of ours had said that, you know, he was doing his sessions on Zoom, and he has a cat that loves to come in and lay across his shoulders. And he said it was really so interesting how some clients would immediately react and go, oh, you know, whatever. And he said, it was astounding to me when, and it was usually men, were just, they ignored it. It was like, okay, there's something personal going on, and I'm just going to ignore that, right?
Right, look away.
So I think COVID gave us an opportunity to be more human. And I think when you're more human, you're more inclusive. We're all human, right?
I love that. It's so true. So I agree with you. I do think there are some silver linings. God help me, we lost so many lives, and that is a tragedy. But for workplaces, it may be shown a light and helped propel some of these important initiatives. As you're saying, we had to relate to people more humanly, even if it's only on a video teleconference.
Yes.
Which opens up the door, right? And I think I applaud both of you for learning and taking this course, because I do feel like it's a space that conceptually we get is important, but it's almost like we don't know what we don't know. Now, you're both researchers and you've published on inclusion and you have competency models, but for the rank and file, there's still a lot of learning to do. And for the executives, I think they have to be persuaded of the business case and what you get for that. So what persuasive data do we have that suggests diversity wins? As you said, Pat, where are we in terms of the business case for this?
Yeah, well, that's where the McKinsey data comes into play that I referred to earlier. They are seeing an increasing gap between companies where there's growth in the diverse populations and companies where there isn't. And what they found was that companies who are in the top quartile of their peer group in terms of gender diversity are 25% more likely to be more profitable on average. They're above average of their peer group when they're compared to the bottom quartile of companies in terms of gender diversity. And when they looked at ethnic diversity and racial diversity, there was a 36% greater likelihood that they were going to be above average in terms of profitability when compared to the bottom quartile of companies.
Wow.
Yeah, it's powerful.
Those are statistics. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's persuasive. And what company wouldn't look at those numbers and say, okay,
Yeah.
we have to move.
Yeah.
So I guess you sold me, and I'm sure you're helping raise awareness among your clients. Begs the question. So if it's the must do, how do you get there? How do you even begin? I mean, creating an inclusive culture, raising awareness and understanding of the value of diversity, not just in those buckets that I learned when I was in college, gender, race, ethnicity, but diversity of thought. How do you start to instill that, or implement that, embed that in organizations so they get those benefits, those boosts in their profitability? Thoughts either?
Pat pulled out this phrase a while back and said that that a leader's shadow is I'm going to forget the line.
Culture is the shadow of the leader.
Thank you. Right. I actually even quote that in collaboration code. So in any case, it's really leaders who create a culture of trust, of inclusion. I mean, it really is up to leaders to have respect for people, to listen to people. You have, in order to be empathetic, you need to listen and respect people regardless of their level in the organization.
I think that's so true. In fact, just this morning, I was having the conversation about really good leaders are good listeners, right? And I think there's a stereotype about leaders, and they certainly have to have a commanding presence and be able to make decisions and, take a bunker or provide like a North Star for their employees. But the way to get grounded and to build those trusting relationships absolutely stems from being good listeners.
You can't always be the smartest person in the room and expect people to follow you.
Right. So tell me a little bit about your how you leverage your research to help clients. What kinds of programs are you helping them build? Have this emphasis on I and D. I love the transposing. Or IE and D.
We've been doing this for a long time, Kelly. We've gone into client organizations to understand their business strategy and culture, where they are today, where they need to be in order to best support where they want to go as an organization.
Yes. And I'd love to explore that more, because you've got some interesting approaches to building collaborative leadership. So let's start there. What does collaborative leadership look like?
I've now looked at women who lead successfully. That's what Breaking Through Bitch was about. And what it showed was that indeed women who advance and get to the top of those organizations, they lead collaboratively and inclusively. So I wanted to understand, because I thought this isn't, there's a nature nurture thing, right? Like, we're socialized as women to be collaborative and to be inclusive from the time we're in the playground, whereas men are socialized differently. I mean, it's more competitive, trying to get a leg up on each other. Even though, there's a lot of emphasis on being part of the team. So I wanted to understand what collaborative leadership looked like for men. And there were a lot of overlaps. I had, I would say right at the core, I realized that for men, there was something that was a little bit different. And I call it tempering ego.
Get that?
Yeah. It's something that it's not that women don't have ego. You have to have a strong ego to lead, but it's the men who get to these high levels that quite often have a very big ego. And if you have a big ego, people feel uncomfortable. They can't relate to you. If you have a big ego, you're not shining the spotlight on other people so that they can grow and become leaders themselves. For women, the flip side is tempering assertiveness, or what we call balancing assertiveness. And again, it's about making people feel comfortable to be relatable as a leader. So collaborative leaders they're relatable. It gets back to that whole human element. And stereotypes make it really difficult sometimes to get at that, because for women, we're taught not to be too emotional at work, right? And empathy isn't that, and emotion and empathy is good. But we're also, women who are very smart seem intimidating. So them putting out their mastery is intimidating. So they're kind of mixed. How do you do this, right? For men, collaborative leadership, and we're talking about empathy and being willing to be vulnerable, having the confidence to be vulnerable. It flies in the face of the stereotypes for men. Men are not supposed to be vulnerable. They're not supposed to be emotional, right? They're supposed to be stoic and strong, and we expect that of them. It's not just internal to them, but we expect it of them. So men and women have their different obstacles to being a really great, inclusive, collaborative leader, right?
Yes, and I wonder then, so it sounds like movement is required from all employees, right? Women need to balance their assertiveness. Men need to temper their ego, as you've said. And I guess a question for you both, do you see that lift or that need to shift being harder in a large organization that's had a lot of history, that's been in business for hundreds of years, compared to, say, a startup where people by necessity have to wear a lot of different hats, they're trying to get going, they're much earlier in their life cycle? Or do you see these kind of frameworks, these mental frameworks about how you should show up at work being sort of the same regardless of size and length of time you've been in business?
It's so much dependent on the culture, isn't it? I mean, it really is. I mean, in some of these big older organizations, they're very hierarchical, and it's not about being collaborative. It's about being directive.
That's true. That's true. That's how they became successful, right? We established the order.
That's right.
Yes. And that maybe makes it harder to change.
I do think it's starting to shift, because we are in a time of continual change, and it's coming at us really fast. And organizations have to be really nimble. They got to be able to turn on a dime. And these big old organizations with their hierarchies where everybody's in their box, they can't do that. They're just not nimble enough. So I think they're really starting to come around to the notion that, wow, we've got to start breaking down the silos, not just the ones across the organization, but the ones up and down too. And that really gets back to the collaboration in terms of leadership. But, everybody can be a leader when it comes to collaboration. I can reach across the functional barrier into the sales and marketing group if I happen to be in manufacturing, and I can talk to them. I can be a leader. I can be a role model for that collaborative behavior. And that kind of collaborative behavior makes us more agile and more nimble. I think organizations are starting to get that. And that's where the startups have always had an advantage.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you're right. And it's such an optimistic view, right? Turning the ship on some of these bigger organizations feels heavier. But again, look at the statistics you shared when we first started. This has to happen, right? In order
Right.
for organizations to attract the right talent and keep them there and keep them engaged. So there's a true business imperative. But it does require change, correct? Right? This is a change management issue. So what should organizations do to kind of ready themselves for this change? What do you think?
Well, I think one of the things that they need to do is to just what Carol was talking about earlier. They've really got to not only listen to people who have diverse points of view, they've got to start drawing them out. They've got to, get them at the table. And if they're not talking, ask them questions, get them talking, make them feel comfortable about putting their opinions out on the table and take those opinions seriously. That's what they really need to, in my mind, that's the big thing that they need to begin to do.
That's such a great point, and I agree. And it triggered another thought because honestly, you want to engage your employees in the dialogue, but let's be honest, isn't everyone looking at what companies are doing, right? From the outside in, people want to know, are you providing that kind of work environment? And they can walk with their dollars. I can either buy a share of stock from a company that's operating the way that aligns with my kind of mindset or what I believe is important, or I can take it elsewhere.
Yeah, and to that point, one of the professors at USF during the DEI course said, more and more customers are concerned about who you are as a company, not what you're selling.
Yeah. So
that whole corporate social responsibility is part of this whole movement too. It's not just internally focused, it's about who you are to the outside world as well.
That's true.
Yes, agree. And that if that doesn't move people to act and respond, well then they might find themselves in a different spot.
Yeah.
So what's next on the research horizon? Is there another blueprint in the works? Is there another book? Where are you all headed with Talent Strategy Partners leading the way here?
So I guess I'll
go ahead, author.
If it's under confidentiality and you cannot share that.
No. I would love to see us going in the direction of research into what does collaborative leadership look like, and what sort of challenges do transgender people, people of color, gay people, are they facing different challenges in terms of being leaders, or are they very similar to what we've already seen when we've, taken this binary look at the world?
Right.
That's where I would love to see us go.
I think that, yeah. And of course, just as men and women are dealing and navigating different stereotypes, there are different stereotypes around transgender people. There are different stereotypes around African Americans. They have different things that they have to deal with. But the way collaborative leadership is demonstrated is going to be very similar. In fact, many colleagues, many African American men, when I was first doing the leadership on women who were successful, they're like, yeah, these competencies would work for me. This is absolutely, it just resonated with them. And these were colleagues and clients that I was sharing, my research with, and they're like, whoa. So I think collaborative leadership, and to Pat's point, I'd like to now bring the whole picture together, because people do want me to talk about, I talk about the men in the new book, right? And it's like, well, can you just put this all together in one package? Which I think is probably the next most logical thing to do. I've thought about, well, maybe Breaking Through Bitch has, a second edition, right? Or, it's the sequel, except
Right.
Collaboration Code is the sequel to Breaking Through Bitch. It would have to be the third, it's the third one. It's a trilogy. Right?
It's a trilogy. That's exactly, there you go. Well, and I think what I'm hearing you say is, you've, again, both of you have gone deep in so many ways, and I'll call it the gestalt of your research and the work you do for clients has sort of, from it has emerged this set of universal principles.
Yes.
That regardless of who you are and where you sit in your organization, there are skills that help collaborativly lead employee and employer to success.
Mm-hmm.
Sign me up for an advanced copy of that next article, book, series, program, because I think that that is a gap, and I think there's a need there that you are aptly suited to fill. So I am so excited about the conversation that we have had today. Other thoughts that you want to share with our viewers or listeners?
The only other thing I would share is that, and going back to diversity and inclusion, or inclusion and diversity, is make sure that you've got good data to look at. If you're going to get into this kind of thing, you've got to have data. We're researchers, so we understand that. The data's got to be clean, but before you start digging into the data, you got to understand what questions you want to answer, which is kind of what we've been doing here. You were saying, oh, what's the next question that you're going to answer, right, with your research? So, I would throw that out to everybody that, understand the questions that you want to answer.
Yes, and I think you said recently, Pat, you can't manage what you can't measure, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Right, and that's true. So beware, because not all data is good, and it can tell you whatever you want. I know that. That's how I got through my stats class in grad school. Trust the data. Know the right questions to ask. So true. Carol, any other thoughts on your end?
Well, and I'm all about qualitative research, right? So, I respect and I believe that in order to make the business case, you do need the hard numbered data to talk about why diversity and inclusion is important. I think another way of measuring is ask people in the organization, right?
Novel concept, right? Ask people. Well, I want to sincerely thank you both. From the data you shared to the fact that you have this masterful approach that encompasses qualitative research, quantitative research, a real deep understanding of what it takes to shift that behavior in organizations. You've given me and our audience so much to think about. So if people wanted to continue the conversation with you, how might they go about reaching you?
Well, the easiest way is through our website, talentstrategypartners.com. And there's a contact us link.
Okay. You
can just shoot us an email and we will happily reply. Or you can call us. We have phones too.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you both so much, Pat, Carol. Delightful way to spend our afternoon today. And sincerely, thank you for the hard work that you're doing. You are unleashing potential in organizations and helping them achieve their vision. And I think that is yeoman's work, and you are doing exceptional in this space. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yes, it's been my pleasure. And as always, for our viewers or listeners, we invite you to post questions to either Pat or Carol, our guest today. And if you have ideas about topics you would like to hear in the future, by all means, let us know. You'll see this podcast on LinkedIn and on our YouTube channel, Engage with KDH Consulting. So until next time, thanks, and we'll talk again soon.